All right. My name is Allison Bamberger, and I'm the Masonry Institute Program Director. Thank you all for being here today. I know it's really nice outside, but I promise this is going to be really nice too. Let's see. I think we see some new faces here. Who is here for their very first Masonry Institute seminar? 1, 2, 3, 4. That's amazing. Welcome. We're happy to have you. Make some friends, ask some questions. A lot of knowledge in this room, including our staff. Back here, we've got Dake-Wells, our executive director. Hi, Dave. We've got Greg Bryant with the Structural Coalition. If you ever have questions about structural masonry, he's your guy. We've got Bruce Augustine. He's our technical director. And Chase Moorfield, our residential specialist, right over there. Hi, Chase. So all things residential, Chase is your guy. So today we're going to talk about K-12 school design, advantages of concrete masonry for function and aesthetics. You can see that course description right there on your handout, and those learning objectives are there as well. This is an AIA accredited course, as well as ICC and PDH. You'll be getting those credits on Friday. Check your email. If you don't get them, shoot me a message, give me a phone call. We'll make sure that they come to you. Today we'll be giving away our attendance prize is the standard practicing for bracing masonry walls under construction. It's a really good resource guide to have. We'll have that for you, as well as some wonderful swag from the Concrete Masonry Checkoff, who has been a great supporter of us this year. You can scan this QR code. I know we've got a lot of those, a lot of QR codes. Scan this one to get to their website. They are a great resource for anything to do with building with concrete masonry. We also have some swag from Best Block, a wonderful partner of ours in this community. We've got Chuck. Come on up, Chuck. You want to say hi?
Hi. My name is Chuck Anderson with Best Block, and many of you may know my boss, Mark Wilhelms, but I just want to thank the Masonry Institute, Allison, for putting on this great programming. Thank you guys for attending, and thanks for the architects for coming in and doing this great presentation. If you need to know more about concrete masonry, I'll be out back at the end.
Thank you so much. Additionally, we want to invite everyone to the Spec Mix Bricklayer 500. It's coming up at the end of the month on October 25th. You can come on out. You can see walls being made in record time. It's a great event. We want to welcome everyone to come out. And if you have any questions about that, you can ask me, you can ask Chase, pretty much anybody that works here will be able to give you the details on that. But it's fun. It's for the whole family. There's hot dogs and snow cones and the whole 9 yards, but it's a really neat competition and a cool way to spend a Saturday morning. So we hope that you'll join us for that. But for today, we are going to have Matt Thornton and Kirk Dillon here to talk about K-12 school design with masonry. Thank you, gentlemen.
Cool. So yeah, can everybody hear me? Okay. So yeah, we'll take it away. As we said, masonry and K-12. I'm Matt Thornton.
I'm Kirk Dillon. Nice to meet you guys.
Good to see you. We're both architects from Dake-Wells Architecture out of our Springfield office. We also have a Kansas City office. And we do a lot of education projects. I think about 80% of our work, generally speaking, is education. A large portion of that is K-12. And what's kind of fun is I took this out of an RFQ and I realized if you take all those projects and you highlight the ones that are masonry, that's almost every project. And the ones that aren't highlighted are master planning and athletic fields. So kind of fun. So why do we do masonry, right? It goes back to those learning objectives that we've kind of already covered, but that first line, safety, durability, resilience, acoustics, thermal mass. And then we also think the possibilities of CMU and the innovation that's possible, kind of the mass customization, if you will, is just a really cool opportunity, right? So because we're architects, we think about projects. And so we thought, why don't we just talk through these 4 projects with you guys today? So just starting with the first one, a new middle school in Reed Springs, Missouri. That's kind of, their district is the top half of Table Rock Lake, if you know where that is. And so they've got a lot of lake area there, and so they needed a new middle school. When they first came to us, they really were talking about renovating this existing middle school, which had been a high school, and it had been kind of added on to over the course of several years with the growth of Branson in a lot of haphazard fashion. And they also wanted a district auditorium. And this project was right after the wake of the Joplin tornadoes. So storm safety was hot on everybody's minds, as it still is today. And so as we thought about it and talked about it during planning and master planning and pre-design, they had the opportunity to buy this piece of land that would connect their current elementaries to their high school. And we realized this building was just not a great building. Parts of it were coming away from other parts of it. And so we talked about, what if we did one project that's a new middle school and a district auditorium? Would that be a better use of funds? They decided it would be. And the only stipulation in their minds was the district auditorium has to be close to the high school, which sounds great until you look at their topography. I don't know if you can see these lines. These are 10-foot contours. So you guys are no stranger to that. So this is a 30 to 60-foot ravine that's adjacent to the high school. But what is the opportunity, right? If that proximity to the high school is important, it kind of made us ask, what about this natural Ozarks beauty that we all enjoy? We've got this great piece of woods behind that property. Is there a way we can actually place the storm-safe spaces in that ravine and create a cave, if you will, right? Conceptually, it's a cave. So we're going to get them, not only is it going to be, a fully rated shelter, we're going to also put it underground because there's nothing more safe than that. So, but, when you go underground to a cave, obviously then you would need kind of a bluff element, which we sometimes also call the big wall, right? That's protecting the front half of that. And then there's a stream component, which is really the major circulation kind of the building in an atrium. And then because, this is where we're spending, I think it's pretty clear, that's where we're spending all the money, then the classroom bar needs to be a really simple utilitarian, we call it the shed, which is fine. So that kind of lays out and plan like this. One of the things that I think we really like about this project is even in the plan, the diagram of that wall is just so clear, right? In the cave space. And here you can see the circulation and then the classroom bar. So what is a bluff wall? If you're going to construct a bluff, what does that look like? So this is one of the churches that we thought was a great way to take these super masonry limestone blocks and create this awesome texture on the wall and bring daylight in. And how cool would that be, right? So we kind of started here, but then thinking about our project, we're below grade. We have lots of retaining issues that we're going to have to deal with, waterproofing issues that we're going to have to deal with. So we know it couldn't be that simple, but that's what we wanted conceptually, if that makes sense. A solid masonry mass. So, and then the bluffs in our area, and kind of as you go around the Ozarks, you probably all know this too. Every single one's different, and every square inch of the bluff is a different piece. But some of the things that we were thinking about with the bluff is this tendency to have kind of a mixture of colors. And then we also kind of have these zones that are, recessed in or kind of eroded out of the main face. So again, that big wall ended up being 480 feet long. This is actually not all of it. There's more over here. And we knew, okay, we want to clad this thing in masonry for all the reasons that we've already talked about. But over the course of a 480-foot wall, we didn't want to see the constellation effect, if you will, right? You guys have probably all had those projects where you stand back at the wall and someone's like, is that a whale? There's a whale there, right? We don't want to see any constellations. So how would we do that over the span of a 480-foot wall? And so what we got into was really developing a pattern, a specific pattern that is tiled and repeated across the wall in conceptually in panels. And I don't know, we were trying to remember how many of these you and Bethany did. It was a lot. I would say this is like the 40th try, right? Over this 480-foot long wall. And one of the things we realized really helped it was kind of a vertical offset to the pattern, right? And then we had some notes about how that would corbel and whatnot. But knowing we didn't really want to test this theory, right, for the first time on this 480-foot wall, we do a standalone mock-up, which I think is just always so much better than an in-place mock-up. And we can talk about that later if people disagree. But we learned a lot of things from this. As we were working with our mason and our supplier, we realized part of the issue, right, with this approach is that's a pretty large pattern. It's pretty complex. So the mason, as you're laying up walls, you can't really sit there and go, well, am I on row 4 or am I on row 5? And am I on which color block am I on? And so, there were issues that we saw where the corbelling didn't cross and the color was in the wrong spot. And the mason thought, well, we had lots of meetings. They're like, we thought you meant a pattern like this. We're like, no, we meant this pattern. They're like, how are we going to do that across 480 feet, right? But we worked through that, and what they came up with, was really their idea, was creating this pattern jig out of plywood that they could then just spray paint a stencil on the wall, and that told the masons exactly what they were doing at each spot, right? Because their concern was production and efficiency, right, and spending time on the job. So we thought that was a great answer, and so they shifted that. So that was a fantastic lesson we learned here. The other thing that none of us saw coming was, we've been showing the owner renderings and whatnot of this block, but once we actually got it laid up, they're like, whoa, that's like dark yellow. That's not what we want. We want the renderings were whiter. So we're like, oh, well, glad we caught that here. So how do we adjust that color? And then the other thing that we did was we trialed all the building envelope, all the flashings and transitions to other work were all tested on the, so it's not just an aesthetic mock-up, it's a functional building envelope mock-up too. Another, I think, really great opportunity when you're doing a standalone piece. So, money, there's cost here, but I think sometimes the subs initially see this as just an unnecessary step that causes them a lot of time and trouble. But very few instances, by the time we're done with this, do we not all sit around and go, man, I'm glad we got that flashing wrong on the mock-up and didn't have to change it on the building, right? We did talk about that, yes. It is, I want to say it's a 1/2-inch corbel. So we actually have some rock climbing folks in the office. It's not really climbable. It's also a weather-struck joint, so it's a sloped surface as well. But that actually did come up, and we talked about, wait a minute, these are middle school kids / monkeys, right? So this is outside, and it's actually a little bit washed out, so it's hard to tell what the difference is here. But again, I think this goes back to something that we like to do a lot, which is collaborate all the way through, including the masons, including our suppliers. So once we got that kind of news, it was a little bit shocking to us about the color. We got with Midwest Block at the time, Best Block now, who was the supplier. Sorry, strike that name. Forget I said that. But we were able to just say they want it whiter, and they said, well, we could just put in less integral color. How would that work? And we were like, well, we don't know. Show us what it would look like. And so that actually became a custom color for a while. That became a normal run. And again, just these opportunities that are out there, right, to not add cost to the project, but get the owner what they want and develop, really, we think, something that's better than what we had originally designed, which is super cool. So then again, conceptually, this big wall was this massive masonry element, and so we wanted it to read like that. And I think some of the ways that we did that, which we still think are really fun, are on the ends of this wall, right? Instead of turning the coursing, we actually switched to an end coursing, and used tricks of the trade that have been around for centuries, but that really emphasized that this is this continuous wall, right, in this direction, and it's just kind of cut off at the ends, which we think kind of make it nice. And then when you go inside, right, the flip side of the cave is we're putting some spaces 3 stories underground. So we didn't want those to be grandma's basement dungeon spaces. We wanted them to be light, bright, educational spaces. And so we had this clear story kind of in this, again, we call it the stream space, and that light and the big wall really inside that masonry acts as a light diffuser, if you will. And then, different times of the day, the light is catching the bricks and the corbelling differently. And so, just the appearance of the wall over time completely changes, any given hour of the day and across seasons, which we think is great. And another use of masonry with the split face block, which formed kind of a lot of interior circulation finishes and It was the base of the shed that the shed's kind of resting on. In all these main big spaces, we're not painting this masonry, right? We're just exposing these units and sealing it, which we think really gives the space a warmer feel, and less institutional, and really more durable, less maintenance as well. So there's this wood element that is kind of veiling the classroom bar from the main spaces to reduce sight lines a little bit and just help share that daylight through. And then all these spaces all have a view up to the atrium, and then also kind of behind us, a view out to the woods that we saw earlier. And so that's kind of a typical classroom, right? So again, the shed was the utilitarian spot. It was a spot to save the money that pays for the big wall, right? And so it is painted block, but again, it's very durable. And then we use some ground face base as our base. Again, I think that's way more durable than a vinyl and keeps it all in that one trade and really helps us with that. So that's the first project. Second project is Jarrett Middle School. And so this one is in Springfield, Missouri. This is for SPS public schools. And this was really the first project in the center of the city, after many years of kind of growth around the perimeter, right, to address these 3 original middle schools that the district had built. They were all built kind of in the 1926 timeline. And so they'd been in service for 100 years. They'd been added on to. They had lots of wear and tear and lots of issues. And so they were really at the point also on their sites of not being able to fit or sustain any more growth. And so this project's kind of the flagship of the first of 3 new middle schools for the district. And we knew that masonry was going to be important right away. They're the Trojans. And so one of the early ideas that you can see here is a forum. So kind of thinking back to, the ancient origins of education in the marketplace. And then we also have this cast stone white base that kind of slopes through the site, and that kind of represents all the shared spaces in the building. And then we wanted to break the scale of this building. It's 130,000 plus square feet, and really the neighborhood that it sits in are houses with eaves of 8 feet, right? So how can we be a good neighbor and, be a friendly giant, right? Not a scary giant in this neighborhood of these tiny houses. And so we knew we wanted to do things like pull canopies out and pull these amenities kind of out of the main mass of the building to help break down the scale. And so you can kind of see that diagram. I might point over here some for you guys too, but you can see the diagram there. The gray is the gray block, and that's the forum piece. And then again, that little white ribbon is all the shared amenities. So music, library, art, office, all those things. And then you've got this kind of hovering red terracotta clad classroom bar. So yeah, that masonry forms the bulk of that forum space and provides some load bearing functions and provides all the shear for that space. And it's also inside and outside finishes. We'll see in a minute. And it allows us to do things like this, which is their Trojan logo. But here we're doing it as aluminum fins that were set up to notch into the joints. So that was kind of coordinated back and forth between the mason and the signage contractor with some giant templates. And what's kind of cool about those, you've kind of seen a couple pictures of it already. Again, time of day, light and shadow. We're kind of casting light and shadow onto the masonry surface. And these look different every single time you come out to the site, which is super fun. So again, one of the main reasons this has a lot of masonry in it is the budget target here was $246 a square foot, which I'd love to be able to do again. Maybe we will sometime, but haven't, especially at this quality level, haven't seen that for a little bit. But again, you're kind of seeing the form box there in the blue, and then the light red is the classroom wing. So there's a hub for each grade, and then all the shared spaces, kind of sidecar, if you will, around that forum. So really the masonry here is kind of the best supporting actor. It's supporting this move, which is we call it the trireme, which is a warship that the Trojans would have had as kind of their main identity and flagship piece. that handles a lot of the acoustics in this main forum space. And you can kind of see that this is all the public gathering spaces kind of grouped into one move, and a learning stair, taking advantage of all that housed within that masonry shell and supported by that masonry shell. So that worked out, I think, really well under construction, because as you can see, they were able to, like, as steel was progressing on the classrooms, they're able to get the masonry up in preparations for supporting the forum zone, right? And that resulted in a gym like this, right? That we just think is, great finish. This is not paint, right? This is integrally colored. They're never going to have to paint this. All those advantages that are possible with masonry, but there's the thing of it's structural, so it was there from, day 2 or whatever you want to call it. And you can probably see kind of in some of these zones, right? You got efflorescence going on. We got construction dirt on the wall, and they're ready to start the wood gym floor. So what do we do with that? Well, the mason's first answer typically is we need to acid wash this thing again, which we're kind of like, well, it's a dark gray block. We shouldn't be acid washing it at all, right? But we definitely, had a couple passes of applying wash to this thing, acid or the Prosecco or whatever you would want to call it, detergent process. And the problem is you're just continuing to put moisture into that wall, right? So what we really learned is the right answer, and probably a lot of you guys already know this, but the right answer to this is to let the wall completely dry out and then come in and mechanically brush this clean, which is what we did, back to that image. That's how we got here, and that really worked really well. But it's one of those just, good lessons learned that if you keep putting water on it, you're going to keep dry. You're going to keep having wet and dry cycles, and you're going to keep drawing those salts out, and you're kind of creating your own problem. So again, another place where, like a classroom, where you can just read that this is a continuous material. So really, from all those classroom spaces, where you are in the building. A lot of daylighting here that we're trying to do, obviously, and just have a really high quality, long lasting, resilient surface. So these are blended color units, right? They're not different colors. They're just a mixture of colors in each unit itself. And then again, using that kind of ground face block as a base technique was important. And the administration was very focused on, future ready learning, 21st century schools, we called it at the time. It gets a new name every so often. And they wanted a lot of collaboration spaces like this instead of just a hallway. And they wanted a lot of operable glass and a lot of visibility. So I'm guessing there's probably some of you in the room right now that are thinking about, what does that mean for student health and safety, right? That is a thing for sure. We all know that. And I think this was one of those things that we kind of took away from this project. We were really trying to give the district administration what they wanted, and we thought that was pretty successful. But there could have been more engagement of the local community, students and staff, on if everybody feels safe in this space, right? So we'll kind of talk about some measures of that. One thing that I think is also a pretty common understanding that's maybe flawed is, well, if everybody just has a place to hide, they're fine, right? Well, you guys probably know this, but ballistic resistance of standard drywall, none, right? None at all. Doesn't matter what caliber or anything, it's going right through that. Wood stud even, almost none. But you step up to concrete masonry and you immediately jump to a moderate level. And then as you reinforce and grout masonry, you can get to a pretty high level. And then kind of, concrete in this chart is kind of the high end. There's other specialized products, obviously, that you could use when you're talking about opaque systems. But concrete masonry is offering a lot of advantage at a little cost here, and a lot of other advantages like the durability and cleanability. So again, a little bit of a lesson learned. That other project, Jarrett, that we were just talking about, has a lot of these same thoughts too. But I think what we have started to do more and more since then is we think about layers of security, which is somewhat true there also. First, it's the exterior, and if anybody knows SEPTED, that's a great organization to learn more about some of these standards and ways to think these things through. But from the site, then the exterior envelope of the building, then to a pod, then to a classroom, and then to a shelter-in-place zone. So I think what's important for people that people often don't understand here is there's really no, someone that has the right tools will overcome any design given time. But what we're trying to do is buy time for a response, right? If that makes sense. You need those 6 to 15 minutes or whatever your police response time is so that the police can get there and solve it, right? There's really no building that on its own is going to be impervious to an attack, if that makes sense. But there's ways, right, to do masonry wing walls like you see here, which then can create a sightline safe zone, right? And then the students are able to shelter in place. That door is able to be barricaded. There's other strategies here too, like you see the room in the upper corner where multiple rooms have a door connecting so they can get to that safe space. So you're just building in layers and time. And so I think the key here is, we could just go, you know what, education spaces just need to be prisons now, right? That's not the right answer. We've got, the kids need daylight. That's pretty well proven. That's one of the simplest things that we can do as designers to improve, well-being, test-taking scores, learning, all those metrics. So we really can't do without that, and then we've got to make these spaces psychologically safe, but we also have to, in these buildings, especially at a middle school level, supervision's key, right? These kids are just starting to get some independence, and so teachers want to be able to send them out into a small group. That'll take place out here, which you saw, and so they need a way, they have to be able to see those kids so that they're still supervising those kids while they're in this class. So you've got all these things, and then you've got bullying, right? And all those kinds of zones where hiding places, make that worse. So you got to take all these things into account and have really a balanced approach. So, and then once you think you're there, then you engage with the whole community, admin, student, staff, everybody, right? So again, back to that palette, you kind of see how the masonry makes up a good chunk of that palette. The other thing we ended up using masonry here for is some acoustics. We'll get to that in a second. Again, we did a lot of testing with the standalone mock-up here, and so you kind of see the cast stone base. We were doing this funky vertical running bond, so how we were going to flash that. We had a sloped curtain wall, which I don't know if you've done, but presents some challenges. So how we were going to get that flashed and make a good transition between those materials. So all that got tested on the mock-up. And then we had a couple of these spaces that really needed good acoustics, but also had to be super durable. So this is a multi-purpose room that's used for archery, cheerleading, miscellaneous practices, occupational therapy, all kinds of really active uses, right? But we didn't want that space to be, it couldn't be an uncomfortably and overly lively space. So we used this acoustic cell block product, which still allowed us some load-bearing, reinforcing opportunities, but then does diffusion and absorption in that space at the same time. And kind of in the same zone, we're in the storm shelter on this project, so there's a lot of concrete walls, but we knew the band room really needed some diffusion more than absorption, so we took a different tack there and did a 4-inch block wall with kind of a special shape that you can see there, which results in this space. And that's really about when the kids practice in this space, they're able, instead of just hearing the muffled roar, they're able to really hear clearly the other players in the group and the director. Cool. So first two projects.
I think we kind of hit the K-12 stuff, so we thought we're going to cheat a little bit. So we're going to throw in a couple of maybe bonus projects. We like to play around with masonry, so it's kind of the fun of it. It's like blocks, right? So it's not uncommon that we have a stack of blocks in the office and we're twisting them and turning them and trying to see what we can do. And the modular nature of it allows you to do that. So a couple of these projects I'll show you, we've been playing. So this is we call this the command station. So this project is actually a commercial project. I think a lot of cities have these, but this is at a facility where they did open pit mining, and then they started digging underground to get gravel for construction use. And then at some point they realized that they have huge spaces underground that they could lease out. So at this facility now, there's a lot of big industry. They bring in semi-truck loads, but as you can imagine, some of the pathways are kind of small. So they need a place for truckers to come wait, and then they also need a place where if there's some kind of event, some kind of fire or something, a place to meet. So really this is kind of an elevated guard station that they can meet in case of an event, emergency event. And it's also a place for truckers to stop. So just really quickly, here's a plan. It's really small building. On the first floor is a check-in station. There's bathrooms, vending area, and a patio. And then on the upper floor is that guard station. So the whole idea with this, and part of the reason we used block, there's sort of a design idea behind it too, but it also is a bit of a functional consideration where we wanted to have this kind of park-like setting, but separate it somehow from semi-truck traffic, which can be kind of loud, and they've maybe been on the road for a long time and they want a place to rest. So we've kind of erected these big walls that help shelter and serve an acoustic purpose to absorb some sound and block some sound. And if you're going to do that, the best way is either close to the source or close to the receiver. So we've kind of nestled the patio behind these two big walls. And then also it kind of helps set up that observation area so that in a security sense, you can kind of see what's happening across the site. So a couple of interesting things here that we did. So this wall is just a regular standard split face gray block wall. But in playing with the block, what we did was we actually took the one split face side and we flipped it over. So it's just a standalone cantilever block wall, but the texture is intentional, but we just flipped it over. So what you see on one side, you'll see the inverse of on the other side. Where it's outside, it's just a wall with through-all cap flashing at the top, and then where it's in closing conditioned space, we have a little foam insert in the cells to get a little bit of added thermal value. Oops. So the kind of design idea, which dates back pre-us, but one of the partners at our office had worked at this facility many years ago, and they kind of came up with this branding idea. You see these big open mine face, these rock bluffs, and then there's several areas where it's kind of dangerous, so they came up with this idea to use a steel bar grate guardrail system. And so the idea was, well, what if that was the building? And so you can kind of see the direct translation. So the idea of getting texture helped fulfill that design idea, but really simply, because it's just a regular block. And then, because architecture and design is a little bit more than, just the standard wall too, we employed a couple little tricks that turned out, I thought, really well. So one of them was you don't see your standard metal coping flashing here. So what we did is we just took where there's a roof edge, we took the regular raised edge flashing, we kind of merged that with the through-all flashing. And then the top block is solid, has integral water repellent and through-all flashing, so that we were able to get more of a pure wall rather than just your everyday average wall. And then Matt pointed this out too, but we're kind of big into the pattern and modular nature of block. So this project came a little bit later, and I think maybe one of the lessons we learned from that Reed Springs project is that you can have too big of a pattern. So we kind of scaled this one down. So this one's 4x8, which was about the size of a piece of plywood. Assuming again that we might use that tactic of spray painting the pattern so that it's a little bit easier to lay. And this added color actually came during the construction process when they asked for a little bit clarification, and this kind of did the trick. So. And again, you can run through a lot of iterations of this trying to make sure that you can't see the pattern over and over again. So even on this relatively small project, it became apparent that the longer the pattern, and the dark red is really the split face side. So you'll see between the two elevations, it flips. So that's the inverse, but stretching that pattern out really helped hide it in this case. So here you can see from a different couple of angles that as the light hits it, it changes. So where it's in shadow, you don't see it as much, but the more of an angle you get to, you can start to see that pattern a little bit more. So this is, I think, another thing that we're interested in with masonry and the texture is that how it changes throughout the day and even at night. So when at night, when you get some light grazing it, you start to really see that, and it's sort of artificial shadow at that point because it's at night, but the idea that the building can transform because the material you chose, we find really interesting. And also point out that the blue in this isn't paint. It's a concrete masonry stain, which helps you see a little bit more of that texture and color of the block rather than just kind of a thick glossy coating. So this is the patio side of this project, and it really works. It's fairly quiet, a lot quieter than you would think for having semi-truck traffic on the other side of the wall. But I just wanted to point out one of the cool little tricks, because you can work individual pieces of masonry. So the low wall you see there in the center, we were able to carve out a light cove in the top of that. So we were able to use just a regular standard wet rated LED fixture that just points up at the ceiling. So you use the block to your advantage to be able to get more than you bargained for. So we didn't need a fancy light fixture. It's really durable. You don't have to worry about the bugs. Bugs get in there, but nobody cares. So this is looking at it from the other side. This is from the after you've passed through the secure entry point, and this idea that the connection between the underground, which is what they call it, and then the trucks outside, and then just kind of a final shot. You can see that really you have an uninterrupted view of the entire site, and then that block wall kind of helps extend out. And all the block walls are load bearing. So the next project I'm going to talk really quickly about is a project we just finished. It's a Neurodiversity and Autism Center at Missouri State University in West Plains, Missouri. So you can see we're kind of playing again. So we've got some canted walls, we've got some texture, we've got some colored glazed units, and there's a reason for all of that, which we'll get to in a second. But primarily, one of the decisions to go with brick is on this campus that there's a contextual reason. So there's a lot of brick, which goes back to a historic house that we had kind of custom matched on a previous project. And then there's a lot of cast stone. So we thought it's appropriate that we use this, but we didn't want to just rely on what was there. So there was a reason to kind of interpret it. And one of the cool things about this facility is that it has a pretty, sorry guys. I don't know what's happening. All right, there we go. Okay, so I didn't mention, but this facility is a Neurodiversity and Autism Center. So they have a really cool program here where they help students with autism get their associate's degree, and so it's kind of an office function, but it also has classroom space. And so we knew that this is an important facility for the campus and for the community, and so it shouldn't, because of who's in it and what it's for, it shouldn't look like every other building on campus. So again, we used our little trick here for getting a good intentional pattern. So this actually applies mostly on a couple areas where we have some glazed brick units. And then I get a snapshot of this, which I'd seen the effects of it, but I actually saw it here. So I actually gave the mason, I printed off at full scale this pattern, and they used it to apply it to the wall. So it seemed to work really well. Another thing that we've kind of learned over time is we try to avoid the stainless steel drip edges that stick out past the wall. So either a hemmed stainless steel drip edge or a flexible flash knits cut flush with the face of the wall, so that when you're trying to make architecture or masonry become more about an idea, you're not distracted by it. It also, we've noticed, can be a bit of a safety issue, especially in K-12 environments where it can be kind of sharp. And we've actually had issues where somebody had to come in just beat the crap out of it with a hammer to try to make it a little bit flatter, which isn't always great. So again, this is a Center for Autism. So we did a whole bunch of research. A lot of you probably have been touched by it in some way in your family. I personally didn't, so I need to do a little bit of extra research. But one of the things that we found out was really critical is that it's not just a simple spectrum. You're not just on the spectrum. So it's actually much more dynamic, and where you fall might change, where your sensory sensitivities fall might change if you're under stress. And so it's really this kind of multi-dimensional diagram explains it a lot more. So we kind of ran with that. So the form of the building, this pushing and pulling, has really helped us maybe pull it up higher where we wanted visibility, or open it up some where we wanted an entry, or maybe most critically, we were able to make spaces of different scales, which the further you get into sensory sensitivities, there's really no one approach. You need some variety, you need some variability, so maybe some smaller spaces, some larger spaces, and some choice in that. And that we were able to kind of do that. And so the whole idea was that the building kind of represents the autistic experience in a more dynamic way, which left all these really fun conditions. And one of the interesting things is I don't think I got a single complaint from the Masons on this project. They were awesome. They were great to work with. And one of the things that they said to me was, hey, you give us a wall surface, we'll put brick on it. So that's what we did. So a lot of the hard work in shaping the building came down to the structure and the wall framing beyond, and they did. They put brick on it. So here you can kind of see some of the canted walls, and they leave some fun corner conditions and some breaks in the courting, which we'll talk about a little bit more. But really, another thing it allowed us to do was provide some solar protection. So pushing in those windows, the smaller windows on your left are office windows, and then the larger window on the right is into a classroom. So we have some solar shading, and again, some of these tricks about corbelling. So we actually had a conversation during bidding and construction about whether or not we actually wanted these walls vertical, or the units vertical and push back, or if we just wanted to taper the whole wall. And we just kind of, we tend to like the shadow line and the texture that it provides. And we kind of like the idea that a lot of times you see are these sensory panels that give you a sensory sensation. And we kind of thought about early on this idea, this famous architect, which a lot of you probably know is Alvar Aalto. He just kind of wanted to experiment with brick. So we got all these different kinds of samples, and he actually made a house out of it. And so we kind of drew a really good comparison between the idea that brick helps us make a textural sensory experience, which we were after. So we've got some interesting corner conditions. We've got fins. We've got different glazed brick. We've got all kinds of different things going on. So one of the interesting stories here is this project is in West Plains, which, if you don't know, is sort of kind of be a weird black hole. We actually had trouble getting bid participation because the way the prevailing wage works, it's actually less than standard wage in St. Louis, and it's kind of far away from everything. So we kind of, at some point, we kind of backed down, and when we went into this project, we were just willing to accept that, you know, some of the corners probably will have a joint at the corner, and that's okay. We didn't love it, but it's okay. But somewhere, actually during shop drawings, the manufacturer came to us and said, you know, we can make custom shapes. And we'd kind of written that off as probably going to be expensive, but they came to us, and we were pretty excited about it. We're like, that would be awesome. Well, fast forward a little bit, the factory broke down several times. The machinery is really old. Sometimes you can't buy parts for it, so we kind of shifted. And we worked with the mason on site, which was really awesome, and we ended up kind of falling back on this old school technique of just extending the corners over, which we think actually helps make the project better, which is something we didn't plan for. And you know, somebody asked me at one point, like, are you worried about water building up on it? And I was like, I don't think so. I mean, this is like hundreds of year old technique here, right? You see buildings like that all the time here in St. Louis where there's ledges, and it's fine. We have a little bit less culture of brick in Springfield, which is a shame, but to be able to do this kind of stuff is really cool. So here on this end of the building, you see the fins that we were able to do. So again, solar control. So this is on the west. So some deeper vertical fenestration really helps some of that low sun angle. And then you'll see on the left side, we have a variability in opening in the wall, sometimes opening it up for views, and sometimes closing it up for security, and then opening back up at the entry. So this is kind of a composite looking at both sides of that. So where you see the glass is a social hangout area, and then through these fins is actually an outdoor courtyard. So it's a sensory garden, which is really critical for their mission. And then around the corner here, it becomes more solid and then transitions to a blue glazed brick, which we use to signify entry, which one of the big things about sensory sensitivity and autism, neurodiversity, is having some consistency. So we tried to always have the same idea about just a cue that this is a spot to enter because we've used blue brick here, and other strategies on the inside. But again, we had some trouble with the factory. So we actually did specify some solid units here with a core in the middle because the fins are reinforced, but that didn't work out. So again, we went back to the mason. We came up with some options. On the left, you see where we had to deal with the ribs on the backside. So how do you do that? So we did a couple options. So on the left, we flipped them over. It changes. In the middle was an idea that the mason came up with. Maybe we should double them up, and then you hide it so you don't see it. And then on the far right is all the ribs are on one side. So we actually ended up using the one on the far left and on the far right. And again, it's something in the field that changed, that added some depth and character to the project. So here on the inside of the building, you can see what that looks like. Really from the outside, you don't even notice it. You don't notice it till it's up close, and then you can kind of see how it filters the light to help reduce some glare, which is also an important consideration. And this is inside that courtyard. So we knew we wanted to open up this side of the building, but it happened to be on the north side of the building. But it was important because it faces the campus, the quad, and it's part of the active, lively side of campus, but it needed to be a little bit secluded. So we actually chose the white glazed brick to help get light in there and bounce around since it's on the north side of the building to help the kind of plants grow. But also we knew we wanted it to be secure. So we actually used the brick fence here to help open up some view, but also provide some security and a sense of privateness from the campus. And then inside the courtyard are flowers for some different sensory experience for smell. There's a fountain for acoustics, and there's a bunch of different kind of furniture here. And then from the inside the building, you kind of make that connection, which makes the inside feel really nice. And so brick is usually kind of a heavy material. You think of it being really solid. And one of the interesting things that if you pull it apart and open it up a little bit, it starts to feel light. So particularly at night. So we have now all of a sudden you can see through the building, and something that's really heavy becomes opaque and transparent, and a play of light on the building, which is really pretty successful, we think. So I'll close this with a quick story about Puddin here. So Puddin is the foreman, the masonry foreman, who was really awesome. Him and his adult son were the masons on this project, and he was always shy of the camera. And I learned later at some point, he had told the job site superintendent that we were cousins, and we have Sunday dinner all the time, just because he didn't want him to bother him. So I found this out later. But Puddin was a really good mason. I think maybe his real name is Dustin, but I think the point is, like, get to know your masons, because there's a lot of knowledge to share, which we really appreciate and we love to partner with, because they, you're not out in the field. We're not, as architects, we're not out in the field all the time, and so I know we really value those partnerships. And then I guess we'll close with something we say around the office. We have this behind our front desk when you enter, but the idea of what if. So, what if it was this way? What if it was that way? What if we tried something a little bit different? The thing that everybody does, you don't necessarily have to do. And if you rely on all the people around you, you can come up with some things that maybe nobody's seen before. Thank you.
Thank you. So yeah, any questions or?
You mentioned that you utilize block as a base. How do you treat the transition between your finished material and using that block as a base? Just caulk it.
Oh, so a lot of these projects, so the question's about the ground face block base. A lot of these projects that you may or may not have noticed are ground and polished concrete, right? So that's where that approach really shines. Yeah, if you had another material, which we do sometimes, we end up sometimes having kind of a vertical caulk joint, like if it was a rubber floor or what have you. But when it's ground and polished, obviously it just sits right on the concrete. They tool the joint. Everybody's happy. So that's probably where we use it the most. But I'd say, well, we were just talking about this on the way up. Ground and polish can be a challenge, but a lot of our schools, since we went away from VCT because of all the wax issues, a lot of our schools want ground and polished concrete. And so it's just a great way to tie those two together. Good question. Others? One of the other things that's interesting about it that we sometimes have fun with, if you will, there are some times, right, where you need that on both sides of the wall, but those units usually only come one-sided. So then you get into kind of some creative work where you either end up building that out of multiple pieces, or we've also had our masons like field grind one of those sides. So that's something to think about just as you're laying those bases out, especially in a multi-story building like Jarrett. We had to be pretty careful about where those units were on the other side of the wall as well to just make sure we had good consistency. So kind of something that, you don't normally have to think about as much. Cool.
That last building that you showed, I know that below the windows you showed was corbelled. On those taller facets, it looked like they were out of plane. Were those corbelled as well, or was those?
They were, yep.
Oh, they were, okay.
Yep.
Just from the images, it looked like brick was stacked out
Yeah.
of level, and I was curious how that was.
Yeah. All of those canted walls were corbelled.
Go back a few slides to the entry. Right, no, yeah. What's the soffit there?
So that's a glass mat gyp with a EFIS finish system directly applied to it. DFIS.
So is that steel beams up there or concrete bar?
It is. Yep. Yep. All steel structure with metal stud infill, and then a brick or block veneer or cast stone. Sorry.
What's also the brick finish? A single white or a double white?
So it's a single wife, and I had some interesting discussions with my structural engineer because I thought it should be much simpler, and he's probably right. You know, he's the engineer, so I trust him. But we did talk a lot about that. So they are reinforced, and then additionally at the top and the bottom there's a steel angle. In some at the other end of the building, there's individual angles that are the width of a brick that are individually bolted, and part of that was, and we had some discussions about how to get that right in the field. So we actually got them there loose, and then they were applied with the help of the mason to make sure they were in the right spot. In this case, they're longer bands that extend between the groups of fins.
All right. Thank you, gentlemen, so much. That was fantastic.
Thanks.
Thank you all for attending. We're going to do our business card drawing right now, and then we'll let you go. All right, you want to pick number one? We got
Go
three
ahead.
different things today.